I never thought I'd be left behind at my own wedding." Eleanor whispered, her voice filled with pain, as she watched her sisters walk down the aisle with wealthy lords, each one swept away into a life of luxury and love. And there she was, the eldest daughter, untouched by the hands of fate, left to watch as the dreams of her youth slipped away. Eleanor had always been told that love would find her, just as it had found her sisters. But time had passed, and love had not. She had become a forgotten face in the eyes of society, just another spinster destined for an empty life. But all of that was about to change. It was a rainy afternoon when the most powerful man in England, Duke Richard Ashford, arrived at her family's estate. He wasn't just a duke. He was the duke, the man who could change the course of history with a single word. Eleanor never expected to find herself in the presence of someone so untouchable, someone so far beyond her reach. Richard Ashford, with his dark eyes and cold demeanor, seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But what caught Eleanor's attention was not his power, but his gaze. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as though she were something more than just a woman to be overlooked. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just curiosity. The Duke had come to settle an estate dispute, a matter that was of little concern to Eleanor at first. She wasn't interested in the business of men with titles and wealth. But then, as she stood in the drawing room, her gaze met his, and the world seemed to stop. He didn't see her as the woman everyone else did. He saw her as Eleanor, the woman beneath the layers of time and expectation. "You're not like the others," Richard had said, his voice low, but not unkind. "You don't try to please or make yourself into something you're not." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure what it was about his words, but they made her heart race. The Duke, a man of many words and fewer emotions, seemed to find something in her that was worth his attention. And it wasn't pity. It was something else, something Eleanor couldn't quite place. Days went by, and each time their paths crossed, Eleanor found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't felt in years. She never believed in fairy tales, not after all the disappointment. But this man, this Duke, was making her wonder. Was it possible that he saw her, truly saw her, as more than just the eldest spinster in a room full of forgotten women? The storm raged outside the manor one night, and Eleanor stood by the window, lost in her thoughts. She didn't notice Richard standing behind her until his voice broke through the silence. "I didn't expect to find someone like you in a place like this," he said. Eleanor turned slowly, her heart in her throat. The Duke was standing there, so close, his presence overwhelming. But it wasn't the power he wielded that made her pause. It was the way he looked at her, like a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. The world outside seemed to disappear as their eyes locked, and for the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible anymore. The days that followed were like nothing Eleanor had ever known. The Duke's presence lingered in her mind long after their encounters, and every time their eyes met, something inside her seemed to stir, something she had long thought buried. But despite the pull she felt, Eleanor couldn't ignore the part of her that warned her to keep her distance. She had no place in a world so far above her. Richard Ashford, Duke of Ravenswood, was a man of immense power and wealth, and she was just the eldest daughter of a family struggling to survive. Yet, there was a softness in his gaze, a curiosity that defied the boundaries of class and title. On a cold evening, as the wind howled outside, Eleanor found herself alone in the drawing room once more, her thoughts as scattered as the storm outside. Her hand rested on the edge of a chair, her fingers brushing against the smooth wood, when the door creaked open. Richard stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the hall. His presence filled the room, and for a moment, Eleanor forgot to breathe. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice like velvet, smooth and commanding, yet gentle. Eleanor swallowed, forcing herself to stand tall. "You are always welcome, Your Grace," she replied, though her heart was racing. Richard closed the door behind him and took a few slow steps forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Eleanor," he began, his tone almost hesitant, "I find myself wondering about you, about the woman you are beneath the surface." She looked at him, her chest tightening. She wasn't used to being seen like this, not in a world that had always defined her by what she lacked, rather than who she was. "I'm just a woman, like any other," she said softly, looking down at her hands. But Richard shook his head, his gaze softening. No, you are so much more than that. I see strength in you, something that calls to me. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Eleanor's heart beat faster. She had always kept her emotions in check, building walls around her heart to protect herself from the world's judgments. But Richard's words, the sincerity in his voice, made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. She wanted to pull away, to remind herself that she could never be with someone like him. But something inside her urged her to stay. She wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way his eyes searched hers, looking for answers, or maybe it was the way he made her feel like she mattered, something she had never believed to be true. You deserve happiness, Eleanor, Richard said, stepping closer. You deserve more than what life has given you. Let me help you find it. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. His words were like a promise, one that she hadn't dared to hope for. But the fear still lingered, the fear that this was all just a fleeting moment in a world that would never truly accept her. I can't, Richard, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm not like the women you're used to. I'm not. You are exactly the woman I want, he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. And I won't stop until you believe it, too. His words were a declaration, and though Eleanor wanted to resist, something in her heart was beginning to change. Richard reached out and gently took her hand, the touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. Give me a chance, Eleanor, he said softly. A chance to show you that you are worthy of everything this world has to offer. She looked at him, her heart racing. She had always believed she was destined for a life of quiet solitude, but now, with Richard standing before her, a part of her dared to believe in something more. I don't know how to believe that, she whispered. Richard's eyes softened. Then let me show you, step by step. Let me prove that you are more than enough, that you are everything I've ever wanted. Eleanor's heart fluttered in her chest. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt the weight of possibility. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she knew that in this moment, with Richard's hand in hers, something was beginning to change. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally let herself believe in love again. The days after that conversation seemed to blur together for Eleanor. She couldn't stop thinking about Richard, his words, his touch, the way he made her feel seen in a way no one ever had before. Every glance, every word felt like a promise. And yet, she couldn't shake the fear that it was all too good to be true. She wasn't foolish. She knew her place in the world. She was the eldest daughter of a family struggling to keep their estate afloat. A man like Richard Ashford, a duke, could never truly want someone like her. Yet, despite her reservations, she found herself meeting him again and again. One evening, after a long day of managing the household, Eleanor stood by the fireplace in the drawing room, her thoughts lost in the flames. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn around, knowing who it was before he spoke. Eleanor, Richard's voice was a gentle whisper, but it held a quiet command. She turned to face him, her heart racing, and found him standing there, framed by the soft glow of the fire. I'm sorry for how things have been between us, he said, his gaze intense yet full of warmth. But I need you to understand something. Eleanor swallowed, unsure of where this was leading. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I won't stop trying, Eleanor. I won't stop until you see what I see in you. His words were quiet but powerful, and for the first time, Eleanor didn't feel the need to look away. She met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her heart, but now, in his presence, those walls felt like they were beginning to crumble. You deserve love, Eleanor, Richard continued, stepping closer. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not just for what you can give or what others expect from you. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had never felt worthy of love, not the kind of love that Richard was offering. I can't offer you the life you're used to, she said, her voice trembling. I can't offer you titles or wealth. I'm just me. Richard shook his head, a small, reassuring smile on his lips. That's all I want, Eleanor. Just you. His words were simple, but they sent a wave of warmth through her, something she hadn't felt in so long. She had spent so many years believing that she was nothing more than a shadow, a girl who would never be seen. But here, with Richard, she felt like she mattered. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice soft. Scared of being hurt. Scared of giving my heart to someone who could walk away. Richard's eyes softened, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor, he said, his voice low but full of conviction. I promise you that. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt a sense of peace, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had always dreamed of. Not a life of wealth or power, but one of love, of acceptance. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, with Richard by her side, she felt like anything was possible. I don't know how to let myself believe that, she whispered, her eyes searching his. Richard smiled softly, his thumb brushing over her hand. Then let me show you. Let me show you that love is worth believing in. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect. But as she looked into Richard's eyes, she realized that maybe, just maybe, love was worth the risk. The days passed, and each moment with Richard felt like a dream that Eleanor was afraid to wake from. She could feel herself falling into a world she had never imagined, a world where love wasn't a fantasy, but something real, something tangible. But with every passing day, the walls she had spent years building began to crumble, and Eleanor found herself torn between fear and hope. She had never allowed herself to trust so fully, to open her heart to someone, but Richard made it feel so easy. His presence was like a calm after a storm, like a promise of something better. Yet, in the quiet moments, doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. Could she truly belong to a world so far beyond her reach? Could a man like Richard really want someone like her? One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the estate, Eleanor stood by the window, watching the world outside. She heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her, and when she turned, Richard was there, as always, his eyes focused solely on her. He smiled, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world faded away, leaving just the two of them. You look lost in thought, Richard said softly, his voice warm and steady. Eleanor looked at him, her heart racing. I am, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure what this is, Richard. What we have. It feels too good to be true. Richard stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Eleanor, what we have is real. It's not just a dream, and it's not too good to be true. It's the truth, and I want you to believe in that as much as I do. Eleanor swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been this vulnerable, never allowed herself to feel this exposed. But with Richard, she couldn't help it. His words, his presence, everything about him made her want to let go of the fear that had held her captive for so long. I want to believe that, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. But I'm scared. I've never let anyone in like this before. Richard's expression softened, and he reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. I know, Eleanor, and I will never force you to be anything you're not. But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. His words were like a balm for her soul, soothing the doubts that had plagued her heart. For the first time, Eleanor felt a shift inside her, a quiet acceptance of the love she had always longed for. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, with Richard standing before her, holding her heart in his hands, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. I want to try, she said, her voice steady and full of hope. I want to believe in us. Richard smiled, his eyes lighting up with a joy that was impossible to hide. Then we'll take it one step at a time, together, he said, his voice full of conviction. Eleanor nodded, her heart finally at ease. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The weeks that followed felt like a blur to Eleanor. Each day spent with Richard was a mixture of warmth and uncertainty, a dance of emotions that she had never experienced before. She had spent so long in solitude, guarding her heart, that now, when it was finally open, it felt like a strange new world. Richard, however, was patient. He never rushed her, never pushed her to make decisions before she was ready. He simply stayed by her side, his presence a constant reminder that love wasn't something she had to earn or prove. It was something she deserved, simply because she was herself. One afternoon, as they walked through the gardens of Ravenswood Manor, Eleanor found herself smiling more than she ever had in years. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors vibrant against the backdrop of the blue sky. It was a peaceful, almost dreamlike scene, but as she walked beside Richard, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Richard turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low but firm. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I need you to understand something." Eleanor stopped walking, her heart beginning to race. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard reached out and gently took her hand, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I'm not asking you to give up everything for me," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "But I need you to know that I'm ready to build a future with you. A future where we don't have to hide, where you don't have to feel like you're less than you are." Eleanor looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. "You're not asking me to leave everything behind?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm asking you to trust me, Eleanor. Trust that we can make this work, that we can build something real together." Eleanor's heart swelled in her chest, the wall she had spent years building beginning to crumble. She had always believed that love was something that could never be hers, something that existed only in fairy tales. But Richard was showing her that love wasn't just a dream. It was a reality, something that could happen, even for someone like her. "I don't know if I can trust that yet," Eleanor said softly, her voice filled with doubt. "But I want to try. I want to see if we can make this work." Richard's eyes softened, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, standing in the middle of a blooming garden, their hands intertwined, ready to face whatever came next. "Then we'll take it one step at a time," Richard said, his voice filled with determination. "No matter how long it takes, I'll be here, Eleanor. And together, we'll find our way." Eleanor looked at him, a mix of fear and hope flooding her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, with Richard by her side, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that perhaps, for the first time in her life, she was where she was meant to be. "One step at a time," she whispered, her voice steady, as she leaned into him, ready to begin this journey of love, of hope, and of a future she had never imagined possible. The days began to stretch into weeks, and with each passing day, Eleanor found herself falling deeper into a world that was both foreign and exhilarating. The future Richard had promised her felt like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to wake from. She had spent so long living in a world of quiet desperation, waiting for something to change, and now that it had, it seemed impossible to believe. But Richard's presence, his unwavering support, gave her the strength to believe, even if just a little bit. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, moments when the fear of being vulnerable threatened to swallow her whole. She wasn't used to depending on anyone, especially not a man like Richard, whose world was so far beyond hers. Yet, with him, everything felt different. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eleanor stood by the window, lost in her thoughts. She was still trying to make sense of the whirlwind her life had become, but as the soft rustling of the curtains broke her focus, she turned to see Richard entering the room. His presence was always commanding, yet gentle. He looked at her with those dark eyes, and for a moment, she felt like the only person in the world. "You're deep in thought again," Richard said, his voice low but warm, the kind of voice that always made her feel safe. Eleanor smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotions she didn't quite understand. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened. It feels like it happened so fast, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for everything that's coming." Richard walked over to her, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He stopped just in front of her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You don't have to be ready," he said softly. "You just have to trust that we'll face it together. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together." Eleanor looked up at him, her chest tight with a mixture of emotions. "But what if I'm not enough?" she whispered, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. Richard's gaze softened, and he reached out to gently lift her chin, tilting her head so she was looking directly at him. "Eleanor, you are more than enough. You always have been, and I'm not asking you to be anything other than yourself." His words hit her like a wave, crashing through the walls she had built around her heart. She had spent so much of her life feeling inadequate, as if she had to prove something to the world. But with Richard, there was no need for proof, no need to justify her existence. She simply was, and that was enough for him. But what about your world, Richard? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Your life, your responsibilities. I'm just me. I don't belong in your world. Richard's expression hardened slightly, not with anger, but with determination. Eleanor, my world doesn't matter. What matters is that you're with me, that you're here, and we'll build something that's ours. Nothing else matters. Eleanor felt tears welling up in her eyes, a mixture of relief and disbelief. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice shaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough to step into a world that's so different from everything I've ever known. Richard smiled, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here. We're in this together. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by fear, by loneliness. With Richard, she could see a life that was filled with love, not just for herself, but for him as well. And in that moment, with his hand in hers, Eleanor knew that she was ready. Ready to trust, ready to love, and ready to face whatever came next. Together. As the days passed, Eleanor and Richard's relationship grew stronger. They spent more time together, whether it was walking through the sprawling gardens of Ravenswood Manor or enjoying quiet evenings by the fire. Each moment seemed to deepen their connection, and Eleanor found herself no longer questioning her place beside him. Yet, despite the growing love between them, doubt still lingered in Eleanor's mind. Her insecurities, once buried deep, now resurfaced with a vengeance. She was beginning to realize how different their worlds truly were. Richard, with his noble title, his vast estate, and his responsibilities, was a world apart from her humble life. She had been the eldest daughter, always overlooked, always the one who had to make do. She wasn't sure if she could live up to the expectations of his world, of his family, of the life he was expected to lead. One evening, after dinner, as they walked along the stone path that wound through the estate, Eleanor couldn't hold back her thoughts any longer. Richard, she began, her voice tentative. I can't help but wonder if I'm enough for you. I mean, your world is so different from mine. I feel like I'm not cut out for it. Richard stopped walking, turning to face her with a look that softened his otherwise confident demeanor. Eleanor, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. You are more than enough. You always have been. I've never asked you to be anything other than yourself. It's you I want, not the world you think you need to fit into. Eleanor's heart fluttered at his words, but her doubts weren't so easily dismissed. But what about your family? Your title? Your future? What if I'm not what they expect? Richard smiled, reaching out to gently take her hand in his. My family will understand, just as I hope you do. They don't get to define who I love or who I want to spend my life with. That's my choice, Eleanor, and I choose you. Eleanor felt a rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She had never been someone who had the luxury of making her own choices. She had always done what was expected, lived within the confines of what was deemed acceptable. But with Richard, it was different. He was offering her a future that was hers to define. I don't know if I'm strong enough to step into your world, Eleanor admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Richard stepped closer, his presence a comforting weight beside her. You don't have to be strong for me, Eleanor, he said, his hand brushing against her cheek. You just have to be you. That's all I need. The sincerity in his words touched something deep within her. She had always been afraid of stepping into the unknown, of taking risks that could shatter her carefully constructed world. But with Richard, it felt different. It felt like maybe, just maybe, she could find the courage to let go of the past and embrace the future they could have together. I'm scared, she whispered, but I want to try. I want to believe in us. Richard smiled warmly, his eyes sparkling with affection. We'll take it one step at a time, he said. Together, we can face anything that comes our way. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she wasn't afraid to dream, to hope, to believe that maybe she was worthy of the love Richard was offering her. She didn't know what the future held, but as she looked into his eyes, she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to take that first step with him, whatever it may bring. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Eleanor. As Richard and she spent more time together, Eleanor's heart began to open in ways she never thought possible. The doubts that once filled her mind slowly faded as she allowed herself to trust him more each day. Yet, deep down, a part of her still feared what could come of this. Richard was a man of power, and she was still just the eldest daughter of a family on the brink of losing everything. Could their love truly overcome the differences between their worlds? Could she truly be enough for him? One afternoon, as they strolled through the grounds of Ravenswood Manor, Richard turned to her with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice full of warmth, "I've been thinking about our future." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart racing. Richard paused, taking her hands in his. "I want to build a life with you, Eleanor. I don't just want to be with you now, I want forever." Eleanor's heart soared at his words, but a twinge of uncertainty still lingered. "I want that too," she whispered. "But what does forever look like for us? How can we make it work when our worlds are so different?" Richard's expression softened as he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We will make it work, Eleanor. We don't need to change who we are. We'll build a life together that's ours, no one else's. We'll take it one day at a time." Eleanor looked up at him, her chest tight with emotion. "But I'm not like the women you're used to, Richard. I don't have a title, I don't come from wealth, and sometimes, I don't even feel like I belong in your world." Richard shook his head, his hands holding hers firmly. "Eleanor, none of that matters to me. You are everything I want. You've always been more than enough. Don't you see that?" Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart swelling with his words. It felt like a dream, one she wasn't sure she was ready to wake up from. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm not strong enough for this life? What if I fail?" Richard's gaze softened, his thumb brushing against her skin in a comforting gesture. "You don't have to be strong all the time. I'm here, Eleanor. We'll face everything together. And no matter what happens, I'll never leave your side." Eleanor looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she felt like maybe she could do this. Maybe she could have a future with him, one that was hers, one that wasn't shaped by fear. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice filled with quiet hope, "but I know I want it with you." Richard's smile widened, and he pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. "Then we'll take it one step at a time," he whispered, "and no matter what, we'll always find our way back to each other." In his arms, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She wasn't afraid anymore. With Richard by her side, she could face whatever the future brought, together. The days continued to blend into weeks, and the world outside Ravenswood Manor seemed to fade away as Eleanor and Richard's bond grew stronger. The uncertainty that had once clouded Eleanor's heart slowly transformed into a quiet confidence. She was no longer the forgotten daughter, living in the shadow of her siblings' achievements. With Richard by her side, she could finally imagine a future beyond her fears. Yet, despite the love they shared, Eleanor could still feel the weight of her past pressing down on her. It wasn't just the differences between their worlds that scared her, it was the fear that she wasn't enough for someone like Richard. He was a duke, after all, and she was just Eleanor, a woman from a family on the brink of ruin. One evening, as the first signs of autumn began to color the landscape with golds and reds, Richard and Eleanor found themselves alone in the library, the crackling of the fire the only sound filling the room. Richard sat across from her, his dark eyes studying her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Eleanor," he began, his voice soft yet filled with purpose, "I want you to know something." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though inside, she was nervous. Richard leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "You are more than enough," he said, his voice gentle but unwavering. "I don't need you to change, Eleanor. I need you to be exactly who you are. You are the woman I want to spend my life with, no titles, no wealth, just you." Eleanor felt a rush of emotion swell inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she was worthy of his love, but the doubt still clung to her heart. "But I'm not like the women you've known, Richard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong in your world. You're used to a life of luxury and power, and I'm just me." Richard's eyes softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand in his, his touch warm and reassuring. Eleanor, your worth is not defined by anything other than who you are. I don't care about titles or wealth. I care about you, and that's all I've ever cared about. His words, spoken with such sincerity, made her heart flutter. It was as though the walls she had built around herself were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. But still, doubt lingered. I don't know if I can do this, she confessed, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can live in your world, if I can live up to what you deserve. Richard stood, moving around the table to stand beside her. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away a stray tear. You don't have to live up to anything, Eleanor. You just have to be you. That's more than enough. Eleanor looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. She had spent so long protecting herself, so long convincing herself that love wasn't meant for her. But with Richard, it felt like she was finally allowed to dream. I want to believe that, she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Richard smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that made her feel safe in a way she never had before. You don't have to believe it all at once, he said softly. We'll take it one day at a time, together. No matter what, I'll be right here beside you. In that moment, Eleanor felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She didn't have all the answers, but with Richard, she knew that she didn't need to have it all figured out. Together, they would face whatever the future held, and for the first time in her life, she felt ready to embrace it. The days seemed to pass by quickly, yet each one held a new layer of understanding for Eleanor. Richard was by her side every step of the way, never pushing her, never rushing her. He simply existed beside her, a constant presence, and it made the uncertainty inside her feel a little less overwhelming. They spent more time together, and with each passing moment, Eleanor found herself slipping further into the warmth of his affection. She couldn't deny it any longer. She had fallen in love with him, but there was still one thing that held her back, her fear of being rejected by the world around them. She wasn't from the same world Richard was. He had power, wealth, and a future that was carefully mapped out for him. She, on the other hand, had nothing but her family's name and her quiet determination to make a life for herself. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that, one day, that would be enough to drive them apart. One evening, as they sat together on the veranda, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Eleanor finally spoke her mind. Richard, she began softly, her voice trembling slightly, I want to believe in us, I do. But sometimes I wonder if I can ever truly belong in your world. Richard turned to her, his eyes soft, filled with understanding. Eleanor, he said gently, I don't need you to belong to my world. I need you to be with me, to be in our world together. That's all that matters. His words were like a balm for the fears she hadn't been able to voice. Eleanor swallowed, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. But I'm not like the women you've known, Richard. I don't come from wealth or status, and sometimes, I feel like I'm just an outsider. How can you love someone like me? Richard reached out and took her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. Eleanor, my love for you has nothing to do with titles or wealth. You are everything I've ever wanted, and nothing will change that. You're the one I've chosen, and nothing else matters. His words were a simple truth, but they settled deep in her heart. She had spent so long feeling like she wasn't enough, like she wasn't worthy of someone like him. But with Richard's steady gaze, the doubt inside her began to fade. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've never let anyone in like this before. I've always been afraid of being left behind. Richard gently cupped her face in his hands, his eyes locked with hers. You don't have to be afraid, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. I'll always be here, with you. Always. In that moment, Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to carry the weight of her fears by herself. Richard was there, and he would be there for her, no matter what. I want to believe in us, Richard, she whispered, her voice steady now. I want to trust that this is real. Richard smiled, his thumb brushing across her cheek as he leaned in to kiss her forehead. It's real, Eleanor. It always has been. And in that kiss, Eleanor felt everything she had feared start to melt away. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be herself, and with Richard by her side, that was more than enough. The next few weeks were filled with a new kind of quiet joy for Eleanor. The uncertainty she had once carried so heavily seemed to lift, and with each passing day, her love for Richard grew deeper. They shared everything, small, quiet moments, laughter, and even the weight of their future together. There were still challenges ahead, and Eleanor knew that the life they were building wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt certain that they could face it together. One morning, as they walked through the sprawling gardens of Ravenswood Manor, Eleanor felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had always found peace in nature, but now, walking beside Richard, it felt like a new chapter was unfolding. Richard reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity, "I know we've both been through a lot to get to this point, but I want you to know, there's nothing I want more than to spend the rest of my life with you." Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him. Her heart swelled in her chest as she looked into his eyes. She had always been afraid of the unknown, of what it meant to be vulnerable, but with Richard, it was different. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I still have doubts. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the right choice for you, if I belong in your world." Richard smiled, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Eleanor, my world is the one we create together. It's not about titles or status. It's about us, and that's what matters. You are the right choice for me. You always have been." The sincerity in his words cut through the doubt that still lingered in her heart. She had spent so many years questioning her worth, thinking that love and acceptance were reserved for someone more fitting, someone who fit the mold of what was expected. But with Richard, she realized that she didn't have to be anyone other than herself. She didn't have to prove anything. "I'm afraid of failing you," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to disappoint you." Richard stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Eleanor, there is no failure in love. There is only trying, and I will always be here, beside you, no matter what. We're in this together." His words were like a balm for her soul, soothing the worries that had plagued her for so long. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of his words settle deep within her. She had never known this kind of peace before, this certainty. She had always lived in the shadow of doubt, but now, in this moment, she felt ready to step into the light, to embrace the future with him. "I believe you," she said softly, opening her eyes to meet his. "I believe in us." Richard's smile was the brightest she had ever seen, and for the first time, Eleanor felt as though everything she had ever wanted was within reach. "Then let's build our future together," he said, his voice full of conviction. Eleanor nodded, feeling a sense of contentment settle over her. She didn't know what the future held, but with Richard by her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. She had found her place in his world, and it was more than enough. It was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. The days turned into weeks, and Eleanor found herself settling into a life she had never imagined. Richard had kept his promise. He was there for her, every step of the way, and with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger. She no longer felt like an outsider, no longer doubted her place by his side. Their love had become a quiet, unwavering force in her life, and for the first time, Eleanor felt truly at peace. But despite the happiness she felt, there were still moments when the weight of their differences would creep into her thoughts. Richard was a duke, with a life that had been planned out for him from the moment he was born. He had duties, expectations, and responsibilities that Eleanor couldn't fully understand. She, on the other hand, was still learning to navigate the world that Richard had offered her. But whenever doubt threatened to take hold, Richard was always there to remind her of the strength of their connection. One evening, as the two of them sat by the fire, their quiet conversation interrupted only by the crackle of the flames, Eleanor spoke her mind. "Richard," she began, her voice soft yet filled with uncertainty, "sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly belong in your world." Richard looked at her, his gaze steady and filled with warmth. "Eleanor," he said, his voice firm but kind, "I've told you before. You belong in my world because you are in my heart. That's all that matters." Eleanor felt the familiar stirrings of doubt, but this time, she fought against them. "I know," she whispered, "but sometimes I feel like I'm not enough. Like I'm not the person you need me to be." Richard moved closer to her, his hand resting gently on hers. "Eleanor, you don't need to be anything other than yourself. I don't want someone else. I want you. All of you. That's all I've ever wanted. His words settled over her like a warm blanket, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor allowed herself to truly believe in the love they shared. She no longer had to measure herself against the world around her or worry about falling short. She was enough, just as she was. As the weeks passed, Eleanor and Richard continued to grow together, learning not only about each other but about themselves. They faced challenges, as any couple does, but each challenge only strengthened their bond. Eleanor's fears slowly faded into the background, replaced by a quiet certainty that they were meant to be together. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of Ravenswood Manor, looking out over the land they had come to love, Eleanor turned to Richard, her heart full. "I never thought I could have this," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I never thought I could be this happy." Richard smiled, taking her hand in his. "You've always had this, Eleanor. You just needed to believe in it. Believe in us." Eleanor looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I do now," she whispered. "I believe in us." Richard pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in a gentle embrace. "Then that's all we need," he said, his voice soft. "Together, we can face anything. No matter what happens, we'll always have each other." In his arms, Eleanor finally felt at home. She had found a love that didn't ask her to change, that accepted her for who she was, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. Together, they would face whatever the future held, and Eleanor knew that as long as they had each other, they could handle anything that came their way. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of Eleanor and Richard's life together. The uncertainty that had once clouded her heart had faded into the background, replaced by the comforting presence of Richard's love. The days felt full now, filled with moments of laughter, shared glances, and quiet understanding. Eleanor had grown more confident, not just in her relationship with Richard, but in herself. She no longer questioned her place beside him. She had found a home in his heart, and in his world, she knew. She had a place. Yet, despite the peace she had found, Eleanor couldn't help but feel the pull of the future. The past she had left behind still lingered in the corners of her mind, and she often wondered what it would mean for their future when the realities of their different worlds collided. One afternoon, as the sun set behind the rolling hills of Ravenswood, Richard and Eleanor stood together on the balcony, the cool evening air stirring around them. Richard turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity that made her heart race. "Eleanor," he began, his voice softer than usual, "there's something I've been thinking about." Eleanor looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves that crept up inside her. Richard took a deep breath, his hand gently reaching for hers. "I know we've talked about a future together, but I want you to know something," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not just asking you to be a part of my life, Eleanor. I'm asking you to build it with me. To be my equal, not just my partner. Everything I am, I want to share it with you, and I want you to know that you don't have to carry any of this alone." Eleanor's heart swelled at his words. For so long, she had felt like an outsider, uncertain of where she fit in his world. But now, standing here with him, she understood. She wasn't just a guest in his life. She was a part of it, a part that mattered as much as any title or role. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "I never thought I could have this. A love like this, a life like this." Richard smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender. "You've always had it, Eleanor," he said softly. "You just needed to believe in it, in us. And now, we'll build it together. One step at a time, with no regrets." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the weight of his words settle into her heart. The fear she had once carried with her was gone, replaced by the certainty of the future they would create. She wasn't afraid anymore. She knew they had challenges ahead, that the road wouldn't always be smooth, but, with Richard by her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. "I believe in us," she said, her voice steady now. "I believe in you, Richard." Richard pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a gesture of protection and love. "And I believe in you, Eleanor," he whispered into her hair. "Together, there is nothing we cannot do." In that moment, standing in the embrace of the man who had shown her the power of love and trust, Eleanor finally understood what it meant to be truly seen, to be loved for who she was. And as she looked into Richard's eyes, she knew that this was only the beginning of the life they would share. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as equals, as partners, and as two hearts that had finally found their way to each other.